I am Professor Satyanarayan Rao, HOD Department of Botany and Coordinator Environment and Water Management JN College Dhurwa. I am going to teach the students of semester 3rd BSc Botany Honors paper 7th. The topic of today's discussion is genetics. So before I go into detail, I would like to focus on some basics of genetics. Let us first explain what is genetics. What do you mean by genetics? If you raise the question in your mind, then answer will be automatically comes. So the genetics, it comes from the word genesis. It is a Greek word and it means descents. It can best be defined as the branch of biology that deals with the study of heredity and variation is called genetics. Here you see there are two words, very typical and well defined terms, that heredity and variation. These two words together define the genetics. Again, we come to the point heredity. What does it mean by heredity? What do you mean by heredity? And how do you define heredity? This is one thing. On the other hand, the next term, that is variations. So, if you know the terms and their exact meaning, you will come to the exact meaning of genetics. So, let us say the exact definition of heredity. Heredity is defined as the transmission of characters to successive generations, or it can best be defined in this way also: transmission of characters from one generation by parents to the next generation, their offspring. Here, what do you mean by parents? Parents means two partners. You can say one is mummy, other is papa, one is daddy, other is mother, one is male, other is female. This is the gender. One is male, other is female. If the two partners participate in the production of generation, we simply call it parents. And what do you mean by offspring? Offspring means their outcome after they participate in the process of reproduction, the resulting component and results into the offspring. Offspring means next generation. Biologically, it is called as offspring, but in simple way, it is son and daughters and their next generation. You can say son or daughter, etc. But it is a word offspring which is very much implied, and that is the typical term in biological science. Another thing, that is the variations. So you have learnt about heredity. Again, I would like to repeat once more: heredity, the inheritance of characters from parents to their offspring. Matlab, this is the transferring of paternal or parental characters from parents to their offspring, next generation. This process is known as heredity. The other term, that is variations. It means the differences amongst the individuals of the same species. We can say while the transferring of characters from parents to their successive generation, there is no exact copy, or the offsprings are produced are not exactly the carbon copy of their parents. Rather, they are the mixing of both the parents. So their offsprings are not exactly identical, either their mother or their father. So this we call variations. So during transmission of characters from one generation to next generation, they are do not exactly the same as their parents. This change of character is called variations, and we know right from very beginning of the human civilization, it is the variations that lead to the modern society. If there were no variations, we would not be as what we are today. So, the variation causes organic evolution, and in the course of sexual mode of reproduction, it does a most important role in evolution of human race as well as human society. Not only in the case of human, but overall all the living system and all biological system. It is the only cause effect that lead us to changes, as a result of which there are a lot of uh, morphological features that we are seeing today. So, this change of character is called variation, and variation is important for the evolution of organic development. Now, the next thing in under this two heredity and variations is that what is the component and root cause behind this variation, that is called the basis of heredity. Then, what do you mean by heredity? Do you know? That is simply something, and it was the Mendel who, for the first time, proposed the term factors. And according to Mendel, before the discovery of genes, Mendel proposed that heredity was controlled by paired germinal units called factors, nowadays called genes. So, genes or factor is the basis of heredity. We can say these are the fuels of heredity. In another way, we can also interpret these are the raw materials and these are the soul materials. We can say DNA or RNA, that is gene or chromosome, is the soul of heredity. Without this, cell cannot divide, and the parental characters are not transferred from one generation to next generation. So it is the genetic material, that is DNA and RNA, and you also call it gene and chromosome. So the factors of heredity is nothing but gene and chromosome. So, if you go and see the different terms and terminology which are in the genetical concept, only then you are going to understand the subject matter. Again, I would like to remind you, what do you mean by genetics? What is heredity? What does it mean by variation? What are the basis of heredity? What do you mean by characters? How do you mean by traits? What is dominant characters? What is recessive traits? If you know the dominant traits and recessive traits, then only you are going to understand the law of inheritance, which has already been given by Mendel, that we call the inheritance of characters. So these two things, recessive traits and dominant traits, are very much required to understand the inheritance of characters in a better way. Now another terms are F1, F2. What do you mean by F1, F2? It is the first filial generation and second filial generation. What is first filial generation? First generation simply. And what is F2? That is second generation. So these are the important raw material, or you can say the basics of genetics. What do you mean by alleles and genes? At the same time, you will have to know the difference between genes and alleles. Both are The same thing, but both are different because of their roles. The differences between phenotype and genotype, again, these two words, what does it mean by phenotype and what does it mean by genotype? Phenotypes, phenotype, this means the external morphological features or external appearance of any living being, be it plant or animal, that is called as phenotype. And what do you mean by genotype? Genotype, it is the internal makeup, it is the gene constitution for the phenotype. So genotype and phenotype, two things are very much required to understand the genetics clearly. Again, what is codominance? What is dominance? What do you mean by incomplete dominance? What is monohybrid cross? What is dihybrid cross? These are the things you should know, you must know to understand the genetics clearly. Again, what do you mean by homozygous and heterozygous individual? Again, I will like to remind you, you must focus on the basics of genetics, test cross and bike cross. Law of inheritance, reasons for Mendel's success. Why Mendel succeed? Dominance and incomplete dominance. What do you mean by multiple alleles? What does it mean by polygenic traits and quantitative inheritance, pleiotrophic effect? These things are studied under the genetics, and then we will also proceed toward the chromosomal basis of inheritance. So, whatever we have talked about, we should know clearly the basics of genetics, that is, what is gene, what is alleles, what do you mean by back cross, test cross, what is clone, what do you mean by codominance, complementary genes, dihybrid cross, monohybrid cross, genotypic, phenotypic alleles, and again the difference between character and traits. Both things are quite different from each other. So, these are the tips that I want to give you, and you must go through the books and basics. And if you find any difficulty, you are always welcome to ask and know the exact meaning and answer. What about the question? Next day we will again study about the Mendelism in detail.